Have you ever sat down and thought about your relationship with failure? I'm not sure if it's inspired by just failing to get everything done last week or what the reason is behind it, but that's been on my brain this week. What is your relationship with failure? And I'm going to spend the next couple of minutes unpacking some of my thoughts and feelings because my relationship with failure is complicated. The upside to failing is undeniable, and yet I'd be the first to admit that I'm not exactly running open-armed directly towards the next opportunity that presents itself with the possibility of failure. And why is that? I'm not sure, but I'd like to unpack it, and if it's okay with you, I'm going to do it with you guys because that seems to help me learn much more effectively than unpacking it alone in my head. Hey guys, my name is Rory. I am a full-time endurance triathlon swimming coach, and through my writings, my videos, and the podcast, I am hoping to explore some of the details that help me become a better coach, optimize my business, optimize my training, and just help me become overall a better human being and a better athlete. I appreciate you for joining me in reading, watching, or listening to these. Thank you very much for the feedback that I've got over the last couple of weeks as I developed them. I really do appreciate it. And I hope that you get something out of today's video on failing. So as I said, the upside to failing is undeniable. There are kind of four main reasons why I say the upside to failing is undeniable that I've been able to come up with this week. And the first one is that it just presents the opportunity to learn and adapt as you pursue a goal. And part of what I do is teaching adults how to swim. I help adults, triathlete age groupers, learn how to swim. And inherent in that process of learning how to swim, particularly as an adult, because it is a difficult task, is this idea of you are going to fail. So on a daily basis, I am literally telling people you are going to fail. That is part of the process and that is okay. I liken it kind of like the experience of watching a child learning to walk. Every time the child stands up, they take 2 or 3 steps, they fall down again. Each time they go through that and they iterate, they get a little bit better at standing up a little bit longer, at walking a couple more steps, until at some point they stop falling down and they're able to hold their balance and take the steps. Swimming is actually not a whole lot different to that as you learn. And I don't think that life is a whole lot different from that as we iterate every time we fail. In the words of Ryan Holiday, failure shows us the way by showing us what isn't the way. So we literally learn every time we fail and we iterate. The second is that it teaches us resilience. I think that resilience is a vital skill in life, and this is something that I've started to develop a little bit more thinking on over the last maybe 3 or 4 months coming out of COVID and the years that followed, where I think I actually got quite fragile and not particularly resilient. That's probably a conversation for another podcast or another video or another piece of writing, but needless to say, I think I got a little bit fragile through the COVID and post-COVID period. But I think resilience is a key part to life because I think that we live in an open system. Chaos and change are inevitable, and the only way that we deal with chaos and change is becoming more resilient and more adaptable to it. And I think that failing and resiliency are kind of complementary skill sets, essentially, where the more resilient I am or the more resilient I see myself, the more likely I am to put myself in situations where the possibility of failing is much higher. And equally, the more I pursue a goal that has a higher probability of failing, the more I improve my resilience. The more I improve my resilience, the more likely I am to put myself in those situations. And I think those skills complement each other. So failure gives me the opportunity to adapt and be better. It's literally helping me get better each time I iterate through it. The third is that failure has the opportunity to really cause a significant shift in trajectory. And I think this is more and more so the case the older and older we get. The older we get, the more kind of set in our ways that we get. We talked about momentum in a video a couple of weeks ago, and I think the more we continue down a particular path, the more momentum we gain in that particular path. And often if we haven't thought intentionally about the habits and routines and mindset and worldviews that we've developed, we're gaining momentum moving us in a particular direction. And if we haven't been intentional about that, there is a possibility, not a probability, but a possibility that the momentum that you have and the direction that you're going in isn't exactly the most beneficial. It isn't going to be the best option for you. But without some sort of big catalyst, without a big shock to the system, we just kind of continue moving in that direction. And failure has the opportunity to provide that catalyst, to provide a shock to the system that reorients the movements or the momentum that you have. It causes you to rethink the worldview that you're holding, causes you to rethink the routines, the patterns of behavior, and the way you go about things in a way that you now have a problem that you have to solve, and the way that you have been doing things isn't going to solve that problem. And so Nassim Taleb has a quote: "Difficulty wakes up the genius." And if everything is just kind of continuing to tick along in a trajectory that's moving like this, and then all of a sudden there's an obstacle in the way, you need that obstacle to wake up the genius, to make the change, to be able to pivot to something that's potentially better than what you currently have now. And I think failure provides that catalyst. It provides that shock to be able to reorient. And then the fourth, which I can talk to with a lot of confidence, having had the lived experience, and that is that the pursuit of a goal or an endeavor or something that is likely to fail or has a high possibility of failure is actually full of some very unique and very exciting opportunities. And I say that because my Olympic journey, which started in 2002 and ended in 2012, was probably the biggest quote unquote failure that I've had in my life to this point. But that journey took me, that pursuit took me on this epic journey. It took me to places that I had never been before. It allowed me to interact with people that I'd never interacted before. It allowed me to push my body to a place that I would not have ever pushed it before. It presented so many opportunities in the actual process of that 10-year span that it took me a number of years after the fact to recognize this. But the experience and the cliche of the journey and the process are more rewarding than the outcome. But there is absolute truth to that. Now, would I have liked to have gone to the Olympic Games? Yes. But I think even if that had been the case, sitting back and looking at it now, it would be the culmination of experiences through that journey that made the experience what it is. And if I hadn't put myself in the position of pursuing something that was way above the potential that I had, way above my arguably way above my genetic capacity, way above what my mind could conceive. If I hadn't put myself in a place to pursue that goal, I would not have had any of those incredible and epic experiences that were born of pursuing something that had a high probability of failing. And then on the backside of that, the results of that journey has, in a way, influenced the trajectory of the rest of my life. So similar to the previous one where failure is a catalyst, where I said failure was a catalyst to change, the idea that with that failing of making an Olympic team sent me on a journey that has ultimately got me to where I am now. It had me do a deep dive into psychology. It had me do a deep dive into coaching, into mindset, into training, into recovery, into nutrition, into all these different aspects of trying to understand where I might have gone wrong, where I didn't get things right. And that has helped me hone my skills and my craft as a coach and helped me become the person that I am today. And so that pursuit of something that has a higher probability of failing actually provides a huge amount of value in the experience and in the journey. So with those four things, it's hard for me to deny that there is a huge amount of value in the quest to pursue things that fail. And yet, again, I am not exactly running open arms into the next endeavor that has a high possibility of failing. And it's been something that I've had to think quite a lot about this week. And I've come up with 3 or 4 different reasons, I think, or justifications as to why that is. What is preventing the movement towards a bigger goal publicly that has a high percentage probability of failing? And I think the first is that failing hurts. Undeniably, failing hurts. How it hurts depends a little bit on what the motivation is towards the goal. I think if you are intrinsically motivated to work towards a particular goal, failure hurts because of the loss of time, energy, and resources, the sacrifices that you put into working towards that goal that didn't then come to fruition. And this was very much the case for me when I swam and worked towards 2012. There were a lot of sacrifices that got made along the way in that journey. And I was comfortable with those sacrifices because swimming was so high on my priority list. But I missed out on a lot of experiences and a lot of opportunities because I chose to prioritize swimming. And when the final outcome of those sacrifices didn't come to fruition, there was pain experienced over the loss of those and sacrifices of those opportunities without the upside of making the Olympic team. So that's if you're intrinsically motivated towards the goal, why failing may hurt. If you're extrinsically motivated towards a goal, then I think that it simply hurts because of ego and pride, or largely because of ego and pride, because you don't want other people to see you fail, especially the ones that you were motivated to pursue the goal to prove wrong or to prove otherwise. And I think that that is a particularly high driver of motivation towards some big goals, is to prove to other people that you can do it. And then when you end up failing, the ego is damaged because you were not correct, you didn't achieve the goal, and that was a big driving force behind it. So either way, whether you're intrinsically motivated or extrinsically motivated, the bottom line is failing does hurt. And so I think to fail, you need to be able to process negative emotions quite well. And I don't think that that's something that I've been particularly good at. Again, a topic of another conversation or another video. But I think one of the things that potentially makes really good athletes is the ability to block out pain, which allows you to then suffer at much deeper levels in a physical capacity. I think it is quite tightly coupled then with the ability to block out pain and not experience negative emotion. And if you can't experience negative emotion, you never learn how to process negative emotion. And so I think one of the reasons why moving towards a goal that has the potential to fail is not appealing is because failing hurts, and the skill of being able to navigate negative emotions, which are not necessarily bad, but just the ability to navigate the negative emotions isn't one of my strongest suits, and so therefore tend to shy away from it a little bit. The second is that it sort of links, but failing can impact your self-worth. And what I mean by that is the more tightly coupled your identity is to what you're doing. I'll go one layer deeper. If you, for example, me years ago, I am a swimmer. Now I am a triathlete. I am a business owner. I am a husband. The more time, resources, energy I allocate to any one of those things, the more that becomes part of my identity, right? So if I, for example, put all my time, energy, and resources into my business, and my business ends up failing, I then feel like a failure because the business and me are very tightly coupled. If I am a triathlete and I put all my time, energy, and resources into triathlon, and the ultimate goal that I am working towards fails, then it's very easy to see how your brain would go, you are a triathlete, you failed at this triathlon thing, you are then a failure, right? The more tightly coupled those two things are, and this is, again, a conversation that we could go deeper into in a different level, but the more tightly those two things are coupled, the more your self-worth is tied up in what you're doing, and then the more your self-worth gets affected by the failure. Now, if you repeat that failure enough times, if I own a business, I see myself as somebody that owns and runs a business. I fail at business, I fail again, I fail again. If those failures start to gain momentum, it's very easy to see how self-worth then tanks. How do we mitigate that? We mitigate that by having a more diverse identity, so not just identifying as only one thing that has the potential to fail. So there are areas in your life where you can step back and go, okay, I may not have succeeded in that business endeavor, but I still have X, Y, and Z that I have been successful in, and that helps buoy you up, helps keep afloat the self-worth. But still, the impact of failing on self-worth, depending on how tightly coupled they are, is quite tight. Now, I think this is partly buried or rooted in perfectionism, because when we fail, we end up measuring downwards from the ideal. So here was perfect, and I didn't achieve perfect. And so we're kind of measuring the gap between where we got to and the perfect ideal, versus what we should do, which is measure from where we started to where we got to. And I think if we do that, if we measure down from where we started to where we got to versus measuring up against the ideal, then there's less of an impact on self-worth. But probably also a topic for another video. And then the last reason why I'm not running open arms into failing is that the perception of failure is actually potentially more devastating than the actual failure itself. And what I mean by that is, the less I have failed, the less I have experience with failure. And the less I have an experience with something, the less likely I am to like doing it. And then the more I'm going to avoid it, or the bigger I make it out to be. Similar to anxiety, where the fear of what if starts to grow bigger and bigger and bigger until it gets into this massive big thing that's highly unlikely to happen, but occupies sort of all of your thoughts and feelings. I think fear of failing plays out a similar way in your head. And so with that whole perception idea of kind of encapsulating all of that, it brings me back to, what is your relationship and the perception, the story that you're telling yourself about failure? Because objectively, if we get a lot of learning, adaptation, and resiliency out of failing, why subjectively is there no instinct or drive to go towards it? And so again, probably creating this more for me than I am for you, but sharing it with you because I think there's a lot of learning that I can get by teaching it or by sharing it, is trying to find some sort of framework to reorient my relationship with failure. And aside from the 4 undeniable kind of facts, if you like, or very strong reasons why failure is a healthy thing to work towards, or not actively work towards, but take in your stride as you work towards something that's much bigger, I've come up with 6 other reasons this week that can help reorient that idea of what failing looks like in my head and help normalize it a little bit better so that I am more inclined to move towards it. The first of those would be, when failure hits, and it's inevitable that it will hit, is to make sure that you're thinking in the macro, not the micro. To look at it in the big picture of the goal. So if, for example, my goal was to get to the Olympics and I made a mistake at a race at some point in the quadrennial that was leading up to it, in the context of the big goal, get to the Olympics, was this mistake in this practice or at this race massively detrimental to the big goal that I'm working in? Very seldom is it actually that much influence on it. Almost never will you say, if only I had raced better there or done that better at the singular point in time, would the overall outcome over here be a whole lot more effective or more in line with what I wanted to do. So look at it in the macro, in the context of the goal. If that doesn't quite work, zoom out a little bit further and look at it in the context of your life. If I fail at this thing, is that hugely detrimental in the context of my overall life and my experience of life? And very few, now there are some, but very few failures would have as much of a detrimental impact on the overall quality of your life. And again, if that doesn't work, then remember that momentum idea that we talked about earlier, where your life is heading in a specific direction. Failure can be a catalyst of change towards something that's actually a lot better. And so if that then doesn't help too, zoom out one step further, and this gets a little existential, but in the context of the universe, you and I, our existence on this planet is so small and so insignificant that a moment in your life that didn't work out the way that you wanted in the context of the universe is actually quite a small and insignificant event. And that's existential, and that may have negative effect or impact, but if you can swing that into a positive light, it really does downplay the impact of a failure. The second is to reframe. You are working towards a goal and you hit an obstacle. Use that obstacle, right? And this is the book, The Obstacle is the Way, was very instrumental and pivotal to me in reorienting my mind around the failure of 2012. And in the idea that, again, this is a Nassim Taleb quote, the idea that wind will put out a candle but energize a fire, we can use the obstacle in the way to help fuel, like wind does for a fire, the path that we're going to burn moving forward. If you are not resilient, or as Nassim Taleb puts it, if you're anti-fragile, the wind will blow out the candle. But if you are a fire and you're moving in a particular direction, that obstacle that you face, when reframed, can be the fuel to drive you and move you in the direction that you do want to end up going. Number 3 would be, when the moment happens that the failure occurs, to separate yourself from the issue and give yourself a little bit of space. Go for a walk, do a workout, use something that gives you a little bit of space from the problem. Clear your head, and that's particularly helpful. I think this is one of the cool things that we actually could learn from life, from sport. If I have a bad swim workout, I get out of the pool and I leave the pool. That gives me space or separation from the pool to be able to contextualize the bad workout. I don't stay in the pool necessarily. If I have a bad bike ride, I get off the bike. And that gives me space from the bike and the ride, and allows me to contextualize it. And I think if we can carry that idea over into life, to be able to decouple or step away from the source of the issue, from the chaos that is inherent in that failing process, or in that failure that's just happened, step away from it, get outside of it, and allow yourself to separate yourself from the failure, from the experience, and reprocess or reorient or reframe, or think macro instead of thinking micro, or go through the process of reorienting yourself around what particularly happened. I think that that's a very valuable skill, and something that kind of gives you a tool for when it does happen. This is the process, or this is the system. When failure does hit, this is the process, or this is the system I can use to work through it or work around it. Number 4, also another tool that we can add to that toolbox, is to talk with somebody. Ideally, somebody that can remain objective. Ideally, somebody that is separated from the problem. You don't really want to drown with somebody who's also drowning. So if you're both sitting in that failure together, if it can't be constructive, if you can't work together to look for to go through the process of separating, of reframing, of thinking macro and not micro, then, if you're going to sit and wallow together, that's not the most helpful. But to talk to somebody who ideally is separated from the problem, who can remain objective, another tool in your toolkit. Number 5, potentially, arguably better than talking with somebody, is to write. And this is something that part of what I am doing here is talking and writing with somebody that is not talking back, because it's weird talking to a camera. But then writing and sharing those publicly is to force you to articulate the problem, to force you to draw boxes and boundaries around the issue, and giving words to it kind of contains it in a way that doesn't, at least for me, doesn't seem to happen in my head. And so when I talk about it and when I write about it, it it draws, the best way to describe it is draws a boundary, a box around the issue. And if I can articulate it and draw a box around it, it's much easier to objectively look at it and then work through it. Whereas when it's in my head, it's formless and it continues to evolve and change shape. And it's very hard to then kind of box it in to be able to solve it. Whereas talking with somebody or writing it out help me articulate it, and then I can move forward from it. And then the last one, which I think is critically important, is to move again and to do it fast. The longer you ruminate, the longer you think about, the longer you dwell on the incident that happened, the more of a monster it will become in your head. And the more of a monster it will become in your head, the more unlikely you are to act or move again or to gain momentum again. It's going to scare the shit out of you and stop you from moving again. And we don't want that to happen. We want to be able to pivot, to change direction, to use the failure as a catalyst to continue to work towards the goal that we had set, to walk towards in the direction that we want. The longer we sit and think, the less likely that is to happen. Now, there's obviously context to that in the speed at which you move, but more often than not, the faster you move again, the better. And that doesn't stop you from reflecting. That doesn't stop you from learning. And ideally, you are reflecting and you are learning as you start to move again. And that in moving again, there is reflection and learning. But I think sitting and not doing anything is one of the most dangerous things that you can do. So those are some of the thoughts that I have that explain why my relationship with failing is a little bit complicated. I am pursuing two big goals right now that have the potential to fail. One of them is less scary than the other. I'm starting to pivot the business a little bit, and there are some changes that I am starting to make. I've been quite comfortable in the way that my business runs and operates for the last couple of years, and I'm starting to make some adjustments and some changes to that, and there is going to be some friction that comes of that, and that is scary to me, and there is the possibility of failure, and it just can feel that in my chest as I explain it publicly and out loud. And then the second one, which some people know, some people don't know, depending on who you are. I've shared this not very openly, but somewhat openly, is this big goal. Similar to the Olympic goal, I would like to find where my limit is in the triathlon space, and the measure or objective measure that I have used to kind of as a benchmark for that is to find out if my body is capable of breaking 4 hours in a 70.3 triathlon. 3:59 is the goal, and I would like to do it before I'm 40 years old. And that one has quite a large possibility of failing. I do think it's possible, otherwise I wouldn't set it for myself, but it is a stretch goal for sure. And I'm excited to see what comes of it. And as I go through these two opportunities, I'm excited for the journey that's to come. So I appreciate you listening this far, if you have come this far, and working through that relationship with failure. Hopefully there's something that you learned. Hopefully there's something that was of value for you. And if not, hopefully it gives you something to reflect on. And perhaps you will learn something out of that. Again, I appreciate you for listening and following along. Thank you very much. Have a great week. I will see you next week. Ciao.